right, so this is the second in the series issued by the Royal Canadian Mint. 2 videos ago, I did the review of the first one called Panning, and it has an amazing image of a panner. This one is called Prospecting, all right, and it's also 5.9 gold. That's the purest in the world, and this is also in an assay. And it shows a prospector. You can see, instead of a panner, a little bit larger scale, a little bit more sophisticated, but in the Klondike's prospecting pan was a simplest way of prospecting gold, one pan at a time. And El Dorado creeks were the richest gold-bearing creeks where most of the gold lay buried in the bedrock. To reach it, prospectors needed to dig a shaft through permanent frozen gravel, permafrost, down into the bedrock, and then tunnel horizontally. So it was brutal, just brutal. Take a look at the previous video to get the details of that. So in this video, I'm going to share something a little different. In studying, I came across an article that was written by a woman named Alexandra Panetta in September 19th, 2015, before Trump was president. So this is not a hit piece. This is just a fascinating article. I'm going to put the link down in the description below so you can read it if you'd like, but I'll read some of the highlights. And it basically describes how Donald Trump's grandfather basically made the family fortune building a brothel for the Klondike gold rush mania. So it reads like this: I don't have a dog in the race. I am apolitical. This is neither backing Trump nor criticizing Trump. It just is a very fascinating article that is documented, truthful. So anyway, Donald Trump's family history goes back to the Klondike gold rush, where his grandfather, Frederick Trump, ran a Canadian brothel during the gold rush. He amassed a substantial nest egg relative to those days from the Yukon hotel before heading to New York. Now, Frederick Trump had been in North America a few years where he set out for the Yukon. It allowed him to get together a nest egg he had come to the United States for. Whether he could have accumulated that much money somewhere else is highly unlikely in that time period. He left Europe in 1885 at the age of 16. He was a barber's apprentice. His father died very young. Trump wanted a life outside of a barber shop, so he sailed in steerage to join his sister in New York City. Within 5 years, he anglicized his name to Frederick, moved to the young timber town of Seattle, and amassed enough cash to buy tables and chairs for a restaurant. His next big move was heralded by the front page of a Seattle Post-Intelligentsia dated July 17th, 1897, headlined "Gold, Gold, Gold." And it described a resplendent scene at the port involving mountains of yellow metal and men returning from the new El Dorado with fortunes, and Trump sold everything and headed north. The move to Canada spared him financial disaster. He not only sold off 2 Seattle eateries, but he also sold land in nearby Monte Cristo, Washington, just before the floods and avalanches destroyed the nearby railroad and development plans for the town. So after boarding a crowded ship to Alaska, Trump trekked over the brutal mountain pass through Canadian customs and the Yukon River, where he had to build a boat from scratch and transport a year's worth of personal supplies. This was a law by the Canadian government. You had to carry your own supplies for 2 years if you wanted to build a camp to go try to prospect gold. The worst was a notorious mountain pass. The United States National Park Service estimated that 3,000 animals died on this white pass, with many bones still visible today in the so-called Dead Horse Gulch. Owners whipped horses, donkeys, and mules, and oxen and dogs until they dropped. In my previous video, I showed pictures of this. The bodies were not buried or even moved, Blair writes. Travelers had no choice but to walk over the remains. As the months went by, the walls of the pass were stained dark red with blood. He opened a canteen along the route, Blair says, where weary travelers likely stopped for a bite of Arctic roadkill. These are records for similar establishments along the route, Blair writes. A frequent dish was fresh slaughtered, quick frozen horse. This established a pattern for Trump's Canadian business model. It's summed up in one chapter titled The Mining of Miners. Very interesting title if you think about that. The only people that made money were people selling supplies to the miners. And what Trump sold was women and liquor, baby. Unlike other gold-crazed migrants, Trump realized that the best way to get rich was liquor and sex. And in 3 years in Canada, Trump opened an Arctic restaurant and a hotel in 2 locations with a partner. First on Bennett Lake in northern British Columbia, and then moving to Whitehorse, Yukon. Their 2-story wood-framed establishment gained a reputation as the finest eatery in the area, offering salmon, duck, caribou, and oysters, but it offered more than food. The bulk of the cash flow came from the sale of liquor and sex, Blair wrote. She cited a newspaper ad referring obliquely to prostitution, mentioning private suites for ladies and scales in the rooms so patrons could weigh gold if they preferred to pay for services in that way. The Mounties initially tolerated the rowdiness. There were exceptions, according to the legendary Canadian writer Pierre Breton. People faced forced labor or banishment from town if they were caught cheating at cards or making a public ruckus or partying on the Lord's Day. Saloons and dance halls, theaters and business houses were shut tight 1 minute before midnight on Sundays, Bennett wrote, in the Klondike fever. 2 minutes before 12, the lockout for the faro tables would take its watch from the pocket and call, "Last turn, boys." Trump acted as cook, bouncer, waiter, and pimp. She said backroom rivalry was part of the restaurant package in those towns. It was not clear how the arrangement worked. Quote, as somebody trying to attract business to his restaurant, of course he would have liquor. Of course he would arrange easy access to women. By early 1901, trouble was brewing. The Mounties announced plans to banish prostitution and curb gambling and liquor. Trump quarreled with his partner. Gold strikes were getting scarcer. The boom was over, and Trump realized it, Blair wrote. He had made his money, and perhaps even more unusual in the Yukon gold rush, he also kept his fortune, and he departed with a substantial nest egg. He returned to Germany with $582,000 US in today's currency. He found a wife, but he was greeted as a draft dodger for being away and becoming a US citizen during his military years. So he deported from his own country, and he boarded a ship for New York with his pregnant wife and Donald's dad. The elder Trump died of pneumonia in 1918, leaving behind some real estate. His son built the empire. His grandson built the global brand. Ironically, the heir to the now running for president on a platform of mass deportation. But Donald and Grandpa share some traits: an entrepreneurial spirit and formative youth adventures in Canada. Donald met his wife, Ivana, in the Montreal Olympics. So anyway, there's the article. That's the story. This is the coin, and the rest is history. How about that? The Yukon Gold Rush, baby. This is the second in the series. It shows a prospector just going for the gold, baby. Look at the beautiful minting process, flowing water and gold going into the gorgeous, iconic emblem of the Canadian nation, which is also an encryption, so that this in this beautiful packaged. There he is on that Queen on the other side. I think this is a fascinating series. I'm thrilled with it. I can't wait till the third comes out. I just received this today and I did a video immediately. Keep stacking. Much easier to call APMEX or a major bullion dealer and order an ounce of gold than going through the Yukon Pass, my friends. Stack away.